Georgia, 1889. Three bloodhounds were released into the morning fog to hunt down a 14-year-old enslaved girl named Sarah. The dogs were legends in that county. Their names were Goliath, Samson, and Judas. In 6 years of hunting, they had never failed. 23 people chased, 23 people dragged back, bleeding, broken, or dead. The plantation owner, William Carver, expected them back by noon, maybe sooner. He stood on his porch, drinking coffee, watching the dogs disappear into the gray mist. He smiled. He always smiled when the dogs went hunting. But 7 hours later, when those dogs finally came back, they came back alone. They came back different. They came back wrong. Goliath was limping. His front paw was torn open, bone showing through the meat. Samson had a gash across his face running from his eye to his jaw, blood matted in his fur. And Judas wouldn't stop shaking. He collapsed on the porch steps and refused to move. The handler, Joseph Pike, stared at his dogs in disbelief. In 6 years he had never seen them like this. "What happened out there?" he whispered. "What did that girl do to you?" William Carver didn't care about the dogs. "Where is she?" He demanded. "Where's the girl?" Pike shook his head. "I don't know, sir. The dogs lost the trail about 5 miles out, near the old Sinclair property. They just stopped, started acting strange, then they turned around and came back without her." Carver's face turned red. "You're telling me one little girl outsmarted 3 trained bloodhounds?" "It wasn't that, sir. Something spooked them. Something scared them bad enough to quit. Dogs don't get scared," Carver said. "Not my dogs." Pike looked at Goliath's torn paw, at Samson's face, at Judas still trembling on the steps. "These ones did," he said quietly. Carver threw his coffee cup. It shattered against the porch railing. "Get more men, get more dogs. Find that girl before sundown or I'll have." "You whipped alongside her?" Pike nodded and walked away. He didn't believe they'd find her. He didn't believe she was still alive. And deep down in a place he wouldn't admit, he didn't want to find out what had frightened his dogs so badly they'd rather face Carver's anger than go back into those woods. Sarah had been running for 8 hours before the dogs found her. She ran through the night, through fields and forests, through creeks that cut her feet and branches that tore her skin. She wore a thin gray dress, the same dress she'd worn every day for 3 years. She had no shoes, no food, no plan. She just ran because staying meant something worse than death. Staying meant watching William Carver sell her younger brother Thomas to a plantation in Alabama. Staying meant accepting that her life would never be more than someone else's property. So she ran, and she kept running even when her lungs burned, and her legs screamed, and every part of her body begged her to stop. She was born on Carver Plantation in 1875, 10 years after the war that was supposed to free everyone. But freedom was just a word. It meant nothing in the backwoods of Georgia, where white men made their own laws and sheriffs looked the other way for the right price. Carver Plantation wasn't supposed to exist. Slavery was illegal. Everyone knew that. But Carver didn't call it slavery. He called it debt bondage. He told his workers they owed him money for food and shelter and clothes. He told them they'd be free once the debt was paid, but the debt was never paid. It only grew, and anyone who tried to leave was hunted down and brought back in chains. Sarah's mother died when she was 7. Fever took her in 3 days. Her father worked himself to death 2 years later, collapsed in the cotton fields under the August sun, and never got back up. After that, Sarah raised Thomas herself. She was 9 years old, taking care of a 6-year-old boy. She worked in the kitchen of the big house, scrubbing pots and hauling water and serving meals to people who looked through her like she was furniture. Thomas worked in the stables, feeding horses and mucking stalls. They slept in a small cabin with 6 other people. They ate whatever scraps were left over. They wore whatever rags were thrown their way, and they survived day after day, year after year. They survived. But 3 days ago, everything changed. William Carver's son Robert came home from university. He was 22 years old, tall and handsome and cruel in the way that privileged men often are. He noticed Sarah immediately. He watched her when she served dinner. He followed her with his eyes when she cleared the table. He made comments that made her skin crawl. On the second night, he cornered her in the pantry. He put his hand on her shoulder and told her she was pretty, told her she should be grateful for his attention, told her things that made her want to disappear. She pulled away and ran, but she knew it wouldn't stop there. Men like Robert Carver didn't take no for an answer. That night, Sarah lay awake in her cabin, Thomas sleeping next to her. She stared at the ceiling and made a decision. She would run. She would take Thomas and run north. They'd heard stories about colored towns in Tennessee and Kentucky, places where black people lived free and worked their own land. It was hundreds of miles away. They'd probably die trying. But dying on the road was better than what waited for her here. So she woke Thomas before dawn, told him to be quiet, told him to trust. They crept out of the cabin and started walking. They made it 2 miles before Thomas stepped on a broken bottle. The cut was deep, blood poured out. He tried to keep walking, but he couldn't. Every step left a red trail. Sarah knew they couldn't go on like this. The dogs would find them in hours, so she made the hardest decision of her life. She told Thomas to go back to the cabin, pretend he was sleepwalking, pretend he didn't know where she went. She'd come back for him once she made it north, once she found help, once she could come back with people who had guns and authority and the law on their side. Thomas cried. He begged her not to leave him, but Sarah was firm. If they both ran, they'd both get caught. If she ran alone, she had a chance, and if she had a chance, then Thomas had hope. So she kissed his forehead, wrapped his foot in a piece of her dress, and sent him back. Then she ran in the opposite direction, away from her brother, away from everything she'd ever known, into the darkness alone. She ran east toward the rising sun. She didn't know exactly where she was going, but she knew east led to the Oconee River, and the river led to towns, civilization, people who might help. The land was rough, pine forests and red clay hills, scattered farms and abandoned homesteads. She avoided roads and stayed in the tree line. She drank from streams and ate nothing. Hunger was just another kind of pain, and she'd learned to live with pain. By the time the sun was fully up, she'd put maybe 6 miles between herself and Carver Plantation. She thought maybe she'd made it. Maybe the dogs wouldn't come. Maybe William Carver would let her go rather than waste time and money on one runaway girl. She was wrong. She heard them around mid-morning, the distant baying of bloodhounds. The sound carried across the hills like a death sentence. Her heart sank. She knew those dogs. Everyone on the plantation knew those dogs. Goliath, Samson, and Judas. They were famous for their cruelty, trained to bite and hold, trained to inflict maximum pain without killing. Pike the handler was proud of them. He fed them raw meat and kept them half-starved so they'd be aggressive. He'd beaten one enslaved man so badly with his whip that the man lost an eye, just for suggesting the dogs were poorly trained. Those dogs had never lost a trail, and now they were coming for her. Sarah started running again, faster this time, panic overriding exhaustion. She crashed through underbrush and leaped over fallen logs. She splashed through a creek, hoping the water would hide her scent. But she didn't stay in long enough. The dogs were getting closer. She could hear them clearly now, their deep, aggressive barking. She could hear men's voices shouting commands. She looked around desperately for somewhere to hide, somewhere to make a stand, and that's when she saw it. A structure. Through the trees, old and decrepit, mostly hidden by kudzu and overgrowth, she ran toward it. It was a church, or it had been once. The building was small, made of grey, weathered wood. The roof had partially caved in. The windows were broken. The door hung at an angle. It looked like it hadn't been used in decades. Sarah had heard stories about this place, the old Sinclair Church, built before the war by a white preacher who believed in abolition. He'd hidden runaway slaves here, helped them escape north on the Underground Railroad. But the locals burned him out during the war, killed him, and destroyed most of the building, or so the story went. No one came here anymore. People said it was cursed, said the preacher's ghost walked the grounds, said anyone who disturbed his rest would suffer. Sarah didn't believe in ghosts, but right now she'd take a ghost over those dogs. She pushed through the broken door and stumbled inside. The interior was dim. Sunlight filtered through holes in the roof. Pews lay broken and scattered across the floor. The altar at the far end was split down the middle. Birds had nested in the rafters. Their droppings covered everything in a white crust. The air smelled of rot and mildew and something else. Something old and sad. Sarah looked around frantically. There had to be somewhere to hide. Somewhere the dogs couldn't reach. Then she saw it. A trapdoor in the floor near the altar, partially hidden under debris. She ran to it and pulled. The wood was swollen and stuck. She pulled harder, her fingers bleeding. Finally it gave way. Below was darkness, a cellar or basement. She couldn't see how deep it was. The dogs were right outside now. She could hear them scratching at the church door. She didn't have time to think. She lowered herself through the opening. Her feet found a ladder. The rungs were old and some were broken. But they held. She climbed down into the darkness and pulled the trap door shut above her. Just as the church door exploded inward and the dogs came through, she heard them barking and snarling, heard their claws on the wooden floor, heard them sniffing and searching. She held her breath and pressed herself against the wall of the cellar, praying they wouldn't find the trapdoor, praying the darkness would hide her. The cellar was small, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet. The walls were dirt held up by rotting wooden beams. The floor was packed earth, cold and damp. Sarah's eyes adjusted slowly to the darkness. Thin slivers of light came through cracks in the trapdoor above. She could see shapes, barrels and crates stacked against one wall, what looked like old blankets piled in a corner, and something else, something that made her freeze. There were marks on the walls, scratches and carvings. She moved closer. Her hand traced the grooves. They were words, dozens of them carved into the dirt walls by desperate hands, names and dates and prayers. Samuel, March 1862. Lord, deliver me Catherine and baby Rose. April 1863. Headed North Moses, July 1864. They killed my brother, but I will be free. Elijah, October 1864. Tell my children I tried. There were dozens more, maybe hundreds, all carved by people who had hidden in this same cellar. People running toward freedom, people hunted by dogs and men, people just like her. Sarah's throat tightened. She wasn't alone. She'd never been alone. All these people had stood where she stood, felt what she felt, and some of them had made it. She had to believe that. She had to believe that not every name carved in these walls ended in death. Above her, the dogs were going crazy. She heard the trap door rattle, heard wood splinter. They'd found it. But then something strange happened. The dogs stopped barking. The sudden silence was almost worse than the noise. Sarah heard whining, confused and afraid. She heard Pike's voice from outside. Goliath, Samson, what's wrong with you? Get in there, find her. But the dogs wouldn't go near the trap door. They backed away, still whining. Sarah could hear their nails scraping as they retreated. What's gotten into them? Another voice said, one of the other men. They never act like this, Pike cursed. He climbed into the church himself. She heard his boots on the wooden floor, heard him walking around, checking behind pews and in corners. Finally, he stood directly above her. She could see his shadow through the cracks in the trap door. He reached down and grabbed the iron ring, started to pull. Sarah's heart hammered. This was it. There was nowhere left to run, nowhere left to hide. But then Pike stopped. What the hell? He muttered. His shadow moved back. Boys, something ain't right here. What is it? One of the others called. This place, Pike said, his voice uncertain. My granddaddy told me about this church. Said it was bad luck to come here, said the preacher. Put a curse on it before he died. That's just superstition, the other man said, but his voice wavered. The dogs won't come in, Pike said, and I got a bad feeling, real bad. We should go. There was a long pause, then another voice, Carver's voice. You're going to let superstition stop you from doing your job, Pike, sir. With respect, the trail's gone cold. The girl could be miles from here by now. She's probably in the river, drowned herself rather than come back. Carver was quiet for a moment. Then, fine. We'll search the riverbank, but if I find out you let her escape because you're afraid of ghost stories, I'll have your hide. Yes, sir, Pike said. Come on, boys. Let's go, Sarah. Heard them leave, heard the dogs eagerly following them out. Heard their voices fade into the distance. She stayed frozen for a long time, afraid it was a trick, afraid they were waiting outside for her to emerge. But the minutes passed and no one came back. Slowly, carefully, she let out the breath she'd been holding. She climbed the ladder and pushed open the trapdoor, peeked out. The church was empty, dusty sunlight fell through the broken roof. Everything was still. She pulled herself up and stood on shaking legs. She'd done it. Somehow, impossibly, she'd done it. The dogs had given up. The men had left. She was still free. She walked to the church door and looked out. The forest was quiet. Birds sang. Wind moved through the trees. There was no sign of pursuit. She should go. She should run while she had the chance. But something stopped her. She turned and looked back at the trapdoor, at the cellar that had saved her life. She thought about all those names carved in the walls, all those people who had hidden here. Some of them had died, but some of them had made it, and she realized she wanted to add her name, wanted to leave proof that she'd been here, proof that she'd survived. She climbed back down into the cellar, used a sharp stone to carve into the dirt wall. Sarah, November 1889, still alive, still free. Her hands shook as she carved, but she finished it. She looked at her name among all the others and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Connection, solidarity, the knowledge that she was part of something bigger than herself. A long, unbroken chain of people who refused to accept their bondage, who chose freedom even when freedom meant death. She climbed back. Up, closed the trapdoor behind her and walked out of the church. The sun was past noon now. She'd lost hours hiding, but she'd gained something too. She'd gained hope. She started walking east again, more carefully this time, staying low, watching for any sign of men or dogs. The land began to change. The pine forests gave way to hardwoods, oak and hickory and sweet gum. The ground became hillier, rockier. She came to a road and followed it at a distance, staying in the tree line, using it as a guide. She saw a farmhouse in the distance, smoke rising from the chimney. She thought about approaching, asking for help. But she didn't know if they'd help or turn her in. She couldn't risk it, so she kept walking. Her feet were bleeding again. Her dress was torn and filthy, her stomach cramped with hunger, but she kept walking. As evening approached, she heard water, the Oconee River. It had to be. She pushed through a thicket and there it was, wide and brown, flowing south. She'd made it. This was the landmark she'd been aiming for. Somewhere along this river there had to be a town, had to be people, had to be someone who could help. She followed the riverbank north. The going was easier here, the ground was flatter, there was a path worn by fishermen and travelers. She walked until darkness fell. Then she found a hollow beneath the roots of a massive oak tree and curled up inside. She was so tired, her body felt like it might simply shut down. But she couldn't let herself sleep, couldn't let her guard down. Every sound made her jump. Every rustle in the darkness could be a man or a dog, or something worse. But exhaustion eventually won. Her eyes closed. She drifted into an uneasy sleep. She dreamed of Thomas, of their cabin, of her mother's face, a face she could barely remember anymore. She dreamed of the cellar beneath the church, of all those names calling out to her, telling her to keep going, telling her she was strong enough. She woke before dawn to the sound of voices, men's voices, close, too close. She pressed herself deeper into the hollow, tried to make herself invisible. 2 men walked past on the path. They carried fishing poles and a lantern. They were talking about the weather, about the fish not biting, normal things, ordinary things. They didn't see her. They walked past and disappeared around a bend in the river. Sarah waited until she couldn't hear them anymore. Then she climbed out of her hiding spot and started walking again. By mid-morning she saw buildings in the distance, a town, small but real. She could see a church steeple, rooftops, smoke from multiple chimneys. Her heart raced. This could be salvation, or it could be a trap. She didn't know if this town would help her run away or turn her over to the authorities. She didn't know if William Carver's influence reached this far, but she had to try. She had no food, no shoes, no way to survive in the wilderness indefinitely. She approached carefully, staying off the main road. Circling around to come in from the north, she reached the edge of town and stopped. The sign said, Grantville, population 247. She'd never heard of it. That might be good. Might mean Carver's people didn't come here. She walked down a side street, trying to look like she belonged, trying not to draw attention, but she knew how she looked. A colored girl in a torn dress, bloody feet, wild eyes. People stared. An old white woman swept her porch and watched Sarah with suspicion. A man loading a wagon stopped and frowned. Sarah kept walking. She didn't know where she was going. She just knew she needed help, needed someone, anyone, to take a chance on her. Then she saw it. A small building at the end of the street. A hand-painted sign above the door. Grantville AME Church. AME, African Methodist Episcopal. A colored church, colored people. Maybe they would help. She walked to the door. Her hand shook as she knocked. No answer. She knocked again, louder. Still nothing. She tried the handle. The door opened. She stepped inside. The church was tiny, maybe 15 pews. A simple wooden altar. Sunlight streamed through plain glass windows. It smelled like lemon oil and old hymnals, and sitting in the front pew, reading a Bible, was a colored woman. She was maybe 50, gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. She wore a simple blue dress and wire-rimmed glasses. She looked up when Sarah entered. Her eyes widened. "Child," she said, standing quickly, "what happened to you?" Sarah tried to speak, but her throat closed up. All the fear and exhaustion and pain crashed into her at once. She collapsed. The woman rushed forward and caught her before she hit the floor. "It's all right," the woman said softly. "You're safe now. I've got you." Sarah wanted to believe her, wanted to trust her, but trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. "Who are you?" she managed to whisper. "My name is Agnes Porter. I'm the pastor's wife. And you're safe here, child, whoever you're running from. They won't find you here." Sarah looked into Agnes's eyes, searching for deception, searching for any sign that this was a trick. But all she saw was kindness, genuine concern, the kind of maternal warmth she barely remembered, and something inside her broke. She started crying, deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place she'd kept locked away for years. Agnes held her, rocked her gently, let her cry until there was nothing left. Then she helped Sarah to a pew, sat her down. "Wait here," she said. "I'll get water and food." She disappeared through a side door and returned a few minutes later with a tin cup, a plate of cornbread, and a blanket. She wrapped the blanket around Sarah's shoulders, handed her the water. "Drink slowly," Agnes said. Sarah obeyed. The water was cool and clean, the best thing she'd ever tasted. She drank half the cup then. Started on the cornbread. She tried to eat slowly, but her body betrayed her. She devoured it in seconds. Agnes smiled sadly. "When's the last time you ate, child?" Sarah had to think. 2 days, maybe 3, I don't remember. Agnes nodded. "I'll get more, but first, tell me your name and where you came from." Sarah hesitated. Even now, even here, she was afraid to speak the truth, but she was too tired to lie. "My name is Sarah. I ran from Carver Plantation west of here. I've been running for 2 days. Agnes's face hardened. "Carver Plantation," she repeated. "I know that place. We all know that place. William Carver is a devil. He's been keeping people enslaved for years. Sheriff won't touch him. Says there's no proof. Says the workers are there voluntarily. "It's not voluntary," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "None of us are there by choice. He tells us we owe him money, debt we can never pay, and if we try to leave, the dogs—" She couldn't finish. Agnes put a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to explain, I understand. My husband and I have helped others who escaped from places like that. You're not the first and you won't be the last." Hope flickered in Sarah's chest. "You've helped others. You can help me." Agnes nodded. "We'll do everything we can. But you have to understand it's dangerous. Carver has men who search for runaways. He has connections. If he finds out you're here, if he finds out we helped you, there could be consequences." "I don't care," Sarah said. "I'm not going back. I'll die first." "I believe you," Agnes said. "And I'll make sure you don't have to." She stood up. "Stay here. I need to get my husband. He'll know what to do. Don't open the door for anyone but me. Understand?" Sarah nodded. Agnes squeezed her shoulder, then left through the back door. Sarah sat alone in the quiet church. The sunlight shifted. Dust motes floated in the air. She pulled the blanket tighter and tried to stop shaking. She'd made it this far, farther than she'd ever dared to hope. But she wasn't safe yet. She wouldn't be safe until she was hundreds of miles away. Maybe not even then. 15 minutes later, Agnes returned with a tall, thin-colored man. He had graying hair, kind eyes, and the bearing of someone used to being listened to. "This is my husband," Agnes said. "Reverend Moses Porter. He'll help you." The Reverend sat down across from Sarah, studied her for a moment, then spoke in a deep, gentle voice. "Agnes told me your situation, Sarah. I want you to know that this church has always been a sanctuary for those fleeing bondage. Before the war, during the war, and even now. When they tell us slavery is over, we know the truth. We know it continues in places like Carver Plantation, and we will not stand by and let it happen." Sarah felt tears threatening again. "Thank you," she whispered. The Reverend continued. "But I need to be honest with you about the challenges ahead. William Carver is a powerful man. He has the sheriff in his pocket. He has allies throughout this county. If you stay in Grantville, you will eventually be found." "What do I do?" Sarah asked. "We have a network," the Reverend said. "People like us, colored churches and colored families, stretching from here all the way to Tennessee. We can move you from place to place, keep you hidden. Get you north to where Carver's influence doesn't reach. It's dangerous. It will take weeks, maybe months. But it's your best chance. I'll do it," Sarah said without hesitation. "I'll do whatever it takes." "Good," the Reverend said. "But first you need to rest. You need to heal. Agnes will take you to our home. You'll stay with us for a few days, regain your strength. Then we'll move you to the next station." Sarah wanted to argue, wanted to leave immediately. Every moment she stayed felt like a moment closer to being caught. But her body made the decision for her. Exhaustion rolled over her like a wave. She nodded. "Thank you, both of you. You don't know what this means." The Reverend smiled. "Yes, we do. We know exactly what it means. Because we were enslaved once too. We know what it's like to be hunted, to be property, to have your humanity denied. And we know what it's like to finally be free. That's why we do this. That's why we risk everything, because freedom isn't something you're given, it's something you take. And once you have it, you have a responsibility to help others take it too." Sarah felt something shift inside her, a weight she'd been carrying. For 14 years, the weight of believing she was alone, believing no one cared, believing she didn't matter. These people, these strangers, they were risking their lives for her. Not because they knew her, not because she could offer them anything, but because they believed she deserved to be free. It was the first time in her life anyone had treated her like she had value, like her life mattered. She would never forget it. Agnes led Sarah out the back door of the church. They walked down a narrow alley to a small house behind the main street. It was modest. 2 rooms and a kitchen, but it was clean and warm. Agnes showed Sarah to a small bedroom. There was a real bed, a mattress with sheets and a quilt. Sarah stared at it. She hadn't slept in a real bed since she was a child. "This is for you," Agnes said. "Rest as long as you need. I'll wake you when dinner is ready." Sarah sat on the edge of the bed. It was soft, impossibly soft. She lay back just for a moment, just to feel what it was like, and within seconds she was asleep. A deep, dreamless sleep, the kind of sleep that comes from the body finally believing it's safe, even if the mind doesn't quite believe it yet. She woke to the smell of cooking, her eyes opened. She didn't know where she was. Panic seized her. Then she remembered Agnes, the church, Grantville. She sat up. Her body ached. Every muscle was sore. But it was a good ache, the ache of survival. She stood slowly, walked to the door. It opened into a small kitchen where Agnes was stirring a pot on the stove. The Reverend sat at the table reading a newspaper. They both looked up when she entered. "There she is," Agnes said, smiling. "How do you feel?" "Sore," Sarah admitted. "But better. Good," Agnes said. "Sit down, eat. You need your strength." She ladled stew into a bowl and set it in front of Sarah. It was thick with vegetables and meat, more food than Sarah had seen in months. She ate slowly this time, savoring every bite. The Reverend folded his newspaper. "Sarah," he said, "I need to tell you what happens next. Tomorrow morning, a man named Elijah will come by. He's a farmer, colored man, good man. He'll take you in his wagon to a town called Madison, about 15 miles north. There's a family there, the Washingtons. They'll hide you for a few days, then move you to the next station. You'll do this several times, moving north until you reach Chattanooga. From there you can take a train west or continue north to Kentucky. Either way, once you're out of Georgia, Carver can't touch you. How long will it take?" Sarah asked. "To get to Chattanooga, maybe 3 weeks," the Reverend said. "Maybe a month. It depends on how careful we need to be. Carver will be looking for you. He'll have men asking questions in every town, so we have to be smart." Sarah nodded. She could do 3 weeks, she could do 3 months if that's what it took. She'd already made it this far. That night, Sarah lay in the real bed, under the clean quilt, and for the first time since she could remember, she let herself imagine a future where she wasn't property, where she could make her own choices, where she could walk down a street without fear, where she could work and keep the money she earned, where she could maybe even go to school, learn to read and write properly. She'd picked up a little bit from listening to the Carver children's lessons, but she wanted more. She wanted to understand the world, wanted to be able to read newspapers and books, wanted to write her own thoughts down. Maybe she could find work in a colored town. Maybe she could save money. Maybe someday she could even come back for Thomas, rescue him the way these people were rescuing her. It seemed impossible, but then again, 2 days ago, escaping seemed impossible. And here she was. The next morning, Sarah woke before dawn. Agnes was already in the kitchen making breakfast, biscuits and gravy and eggs. Luxuries Sarah had served to the Carver family 1,000 times, but never tasted herself. "Eat up," Agnes said. "You've got a long day ahead." Sarah ate. Then Agnes helped her wash and gave her a clean dress, brown cotton, simple but sturdy, and a pair of shoes. They were worn, but they fit. Sarah stared at her feet. She had shoes, real shoes. She wanted to cry again, but she held it in. Agnes also gave her a small bundle, food for the journey, some dried meat and bread and apples. "You're an angel," Sarah whispered. Agnes shook her head. "I'm just a woman who remembers what it was like, who remembers the people who helped me. Now I'm passing it on. That's all any of us can do." A wagon pulled up outside. The Reverend went to the door and spoke to someone in low tones. Then he came back. "Elijah is here," he said. "It's time." Sarah stood. Her legs felt weak, but she forced them to hold her. She followed the Reverend outside. The wagon was small, pulled by 2 mules. A colored man sat in the driver's seat. He was maybe 40, weathered face, strong arms. He nodded at Sarah but didn't smile. "Can't be too friendly," he said. "People are watching." You'll ride in the back. Under. The canvas. Don't make a sound no matter what happens. Understand? Yes, sir, Sarah said. Elijah helped her into the wagon bed. There were sacks of grain and baskets of vegetables. He arranged them around her, then pulled a heavy canvas over the top. It's going to be hot and uncomfortable, he said, but it's the only way, I understand. Sarah said, Thank you for doing this. Elijah was quiet for a moment. Then, My daughter ran from a place like Carver's, he said softly. 3 years ago, she didn't make it. The dogs caught her, so when the Reverend asked me to help you, I said yes, because maybe if someone had helped my girl, she'd still be alive. I'm sorry, Sarah whispered. Me too, Elijah said. Then he pulled the canvas tight and tied it down. Darkness surrounded her. She heard Elijah climb back into the driver's seat, heard him snap the reins, felt the wagon lurch forward. They moved slowly through town. She could hear voices, people calling out morning greetings, a dog barking, children laughing, normal sounds, ordinary sounds, the sounds of people living free lives, lives she'd never known. The wagon hit a bump and she bit her tongue to keep from crying out. Elijah had said no matter what happens, don't make a sound, so she stayed silent, pressed between sacks of grain, breathing the hot stale air under the canvas. After what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, the sounds of town faded. The wagon picked up speed. They were on a country road now. She could tell by the way the wheels rattled over hard-packed dirt. Suddenly the wagon stopped. Sarah's heart jumped into her throat. She heard voices, men's voices. Morning, Elijah, where you headed? Just up to Madison, delivering some grain to the mill. The voice was unfamiliar, rough, suspicious. You seen any runaways around here? Word is there's a girl on the loose, Carver plantation girl. Ain't seen nobody, Elijah said, his voice steady. Just been working my farm. Mind if I check your wagon? I do mind, Elijah said. But I expect you'll check it anyway there. Was the sound of footsteps, someone walking around the wagon. Sarah held her breath, pressed herself down as flat as she could. The canvas moved. Someone was lifting it. She could see daylight, a sliver of sky. Then a white man's face appeared, peering in. He looked right at her. Their eyes met. Sarah's world stopped. This was it. This was the end. The man stared at her. She stared back, frozen. Then he pulled the canvas back down. Nothing but grain back here, he called out. Elijah, you're good to go. Sarah heard him walk away, heard Elijah thank him, heard the wagon start moving again. She didn't understand. The man had seen her. He'd looked right at her. Why didn't he say anything? They traveled for several more minutes before Elijah pulled the wagon off the road. He untied the canvas and pulled it back. Sarah sat up, gasping for air. What happened? She asked. Why didn't he turn me in? Elijah smiled for the first time. That was James Tucker. He's white, but he's good people. His wife is colored. His children are mixed. He knows what it's like to be on the wrong side of unjust laws. He won't say anything, you're sure? Sarah asked. I'm sure, Elijah said. Now lay back down. We're not there yet. The rest of the journey passed without incident. Sarah dozed under the hot canvas, lulled by the rhythm of the wagon. She woke when Elijah pulled the canvas back again. We're here, he said. Madison. Sarah climbed out. Her legs were stiff, her back ached, but she was alive. She was still free. They were behind a large barn out of sight from the road. A colored couple emerged from the barn. The man was short and stocky. The woman was tall and thin. Both looked to be in their 50s. This is Henry and Patience Washington, Elijah said. They'll take care of you from here. Henry shook Sarah's hand. Welcome, child. You're safe here. Patience smiled. Come on, let's get you inside. You must be starving. Elijah tipped his hat. God bless you, Sarah, he said. I hope you make it. I will, Sarah said. Because people like you are helping me, I will. The Washingtons' home was larger than Agnes's. They had 4 rooms and a proper kitchen. They also had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, all teenagers. They stared at Sarah with curiosity but didn't ask questions. They'd done this before, Sarah realized. They'd hidden runaways before. This was routine for them. Patience showed Sarah to a small room at the back of the house. "You'll stay here," she said. "Don't go outside during the day. Don't show yourself at the windows. If anyone comes to the door, hide in the cellar. There's a trap door under the kitchen table." "I understand," Sarah said. "How long will I be here?" 3 days, maybe 4, Patience said. "Depends on when the next guide is ready. Then you'll move to the next station. It's like a chain. Each family helps you move a little farther north until you're out of danger." Sarah spent 3 days with the Washingtons. During the day she stayed hidden. During the evening she joined the family for meals. She learned that Henry was a carpenter. Patience took in laundry. Their children worked odd jobs around town. They were free, owned their own home, lived openly as a colored family. It seemed miraculous to Sarah, impossible, yet here they were. The children asked her questions. "Where are you from? What was it like? Are you scared?" Sarah answered honestly. She told them about Carver Plantation, about Thomas, about the dogs, about the church where she hid. The children listened with wide eyes. Their mother had told them stories, but hearing it from someone their own age made it real. The oldest boy, Samuel, pulled Sarah aside one evening. "When you get north," he said, "when you're finally safe, don't forget about the people still trapped. Don't forget to tell your story. People need to know this is still happening." "I won't forget," Sarah promised. "I could never forget." On the 4th day, a woman arrived. Her name was Dinah. She was colored, maybe 30. She drove a small cart pulled by a single horse. The Washingtons brought Sarah out to meet her. Dinah looked her up and down. "You're smaller than I expected," she said. "That's good, easier to hide." She gestured to the cart. "There's a false bottom. You'll ride underneath. There's enough air to breathe, but it's tight. Real tight. You afraid of small spaces?" Sarah thought about the cellar under the church, about hiding under the canvas in Elijah's wagon. "I can handle it," she said. "Good," Dinah said, "because we've got a long ride ahead." They said their goodbyes. Patience hugged Sarah. Henry pressed a silver dollar into her hand. "For emergencies," he said. "God go with you, child." Samuel and his siblings waved. Sarah climbed into the cart. Dinah showed her the false bottom. It was a wooden panel that lifted up. Beneath was a space maybe 2 feet high, just enough to lie flat. Sarah climbed in. Dinah lowered. The panel, darkness again. This journey was harder than the last. The space was cramped, airless. Every bump in the road jolted her bones. She could hear Dinah humming above her, a low gospel tune. It helped, gave her something to focus on besides the panic rising in her chest. They traveled for hours. Sarah lost track of time. Her body went numb. Her mind drifted. She thought about Thomas, wondered if he was okay, if Carver had punished him for her escape. She pushed the thought away. She couldn't let herself think like that. She had to believe Thomas was alive. Had to believe she'd see him again. Had to believe all of this suffering had a purpose. Finally the cart stopped. She heard Dinah talking to someone, a man's voice responding. Then the false bottom lifted. Dinah's face appeared. "We're here," she said. "You did good. Real good." Sarah climbed out. Her legs barely worked. Dinah had to help her stand. They were at another farm, this one smaller, more isolated. A colored man stood nearby, tall and quiet. His name was Isaac. He ran the farm alone. His wife had died the previous year. He helped runaways because he said it gave him purpose, something to do besides grieve. Sarah stayed with Isaac for 5 days. During that time she helped with chores, feeding chickens, gathering eggs, hauling water. It felt good to work, to be useful, to contribute. Isaac was a man of few words, but he was kind. He let Sarah talk when she needed to, stayed quiet when she needed silence. On the 3rd day, he asked her what she planned to do once she reached Tennessee. "I don't know," Sarah admitted. Fine work, I guess. Learn to read proper. Maybe save enough money to go back for my brother. Isaac nodded. Those are good goals, he said. But don't rush back. Make sure you're truly safe first. Thomas needs you alive more than he needs you. There. The next guide was a colored preacher named Reverend John Freeman. He traveled in a covered wagon. Said he was going to a revival meeting in Dalton. Sarah rode in the back among Bibles and hymnals. She didn't need to hide this time. Reverend Freeman said anyone who stopped them would just see a preacher and his niece. Nothing suspicious. They traveled during the day, stopped at colored churches along the way. At each stop, the Reverend introduced Sarah as his niece from Atlanta, visiting family. No one questioned it. This was the first time since she'd escaped that Sarah had been able to ride in daylight, able to see the countryside passing by. It was beautiful, rolling hills and forests, farms and small towns. The world was so much bigger than Carver Plantation, bigger than she'd ever imagined. She felt small and insignificant, but also freed by that smallness. She was just one person among millions. William Carver couldn't possibly find her. He couldn't possibly search every town and road and farm. She was a needle in a haystack, invisible. They reached Dalton on a Sunday morning. The Reverend took Sarah to a church, introduced her to the pastor, another colored man named Reverend Brown. Reverend Freeman pulled Reverend Brown aside and spoke quietly. Sarah saw money change hands, saw Reverend Brown nod. Then Reverend Freeman came back to Sarah. "This is as far as I can take you," he said. "But Reverend Brown will help you from here. You're almost to Tennessee, almost to safety, thank you," Sarah said, "for everything." Reverend Freeman smiled. "Thank God, not me. I'm just doing what he called me to do." He tipped his hat and left. Sarah watched him go. Another stranger who had risked everything for her, another link in the chain. Reverend Brown's church was larger than the others. The congregation was bigger, maybe 100 people. After the service, Reverend Brown introduced Sarah to a young colored couple. "This is William and Harriet Mason," he said. "They're traveling to Chattanooga for work. They've agreed to take you with them." Sarah looked at the couple. They were young, maybe early 20s. William had kind eyes. Harriet had a warm smile. "We're happy to help," Harriet said. "We know what it's like. My mother escaped from slavery. She told me stories, told me to always help others when I could, so here we are." "Thank you," Sarah said. She was running out of words, running out of ways to express her gratitude. These people owed her nothing, yet they gave her everything. The Masons traveled by train. It was Sarah's first time on a train. She'd seen them from a distance at Carver Plantation, heard them whistle in the night, but she'd never imagined she'd ride one. William bought 3 tickets. They boarded the colored car. It was crowded, hot, nowhere near as nice as the white cars, but Sarah didn't care. She was on a train, moving faster than she'd ever moved in her life. The world blurred past the windows, towns and forests and rivers, all disappearing behind. Her every mile was another mile away from Carver, another mile toward freedom. She sat between William and Harriet, tried to look calm, tried not to draw attention, but inside she was screaming with joy and terror and disbelief. 2 hours later they arrived in Chattanooga. The train station was massive. People everywhere, white and colored, rich and poor, farmers and businessmen. Sarah had never seen so many people in one place. She held tight to Harriet's hand, afraid of getting lost. The Masons led her through the crowd, out of the station, down a busy street. The city was overwhelming, buildings 3 and 4 stories tall, carriages and wagons and people rushing in every direction, noise and smoke and the smell of coal and horses. They walked for 10 minutes before reaching a quieter neighborhood. Colored homes lined the street, children played in yards, women sat on porches talking. It looked peaceful, normal, like the life Sarah had always dreamed of. The Masons brought her to a boarding house run by a colored woman named Miss Opal. She was elderly, maybe 70, with silver hair and sharp eyes. She looked Sarah up and down. "You're the one they wired me about," she said. "Run away from Georgia." "Yes, ma'am," Sarah said quietly. Miss Opal nodded. I've helped dozens like you. You can stay here long as you need. Work in the kitchen, earn your keep. I don't run no charity. I'll work, Sarah said quickly. I'll work hard. I'm sure you will, Miss Opal said, her voice softening slightly. Come on. I'll show you your room. William and Harriet said their goodbyes. Harriet hugged Sarah. You're safe now, she whispered. You made it. Tears streamed down Sarah's face. I made it, she repeated. I actually made it. Miss Opal's boarding house had 6 rooms, all occupied by colored folks, working people, laborers and washerwomen and dock workers. Sarah's room was tiny, barely big enough for a bed and a small dresser. But it was hers. She had a door she could close, a window she could look out of, a space that belonged to her. She sat on the bed and cried, great heaving sobs of relief and grief and exhaustion. She'd made it. She was in Tennessee, she was out of Georgia, she was free, truly free. For the first time in her entire life, the weight of that realization was almost too much to bear. She cried for herself, for Thomas, for her parents, for every person still trapped at Carver Plantation, for every person who ran and didn't make it, for every dream deferred and every hope crushed. She cried until she had nothing left. Then she lay back on the bed and slept. She woke the next morning to Miss Opal banging on her door. You gonna sleep all day or you gonna work? Sarah jumped up. Sorry, I'm sorry, she called. Be right there. She dressed quickly and hurried downstairs. Miss Opal put her to work immediately. Washing dishes, scrubbing floors, preparing meals. The work was hard. But Sarah didn't mind. She was working for herself now. Every task she completed was proof that she was free, that she could make her own choices, that her life belonged to her. The other boarders were kind. They welcomed her, asked her story. She told them the basics. They nodded knowingly. They'd all heard similar stories. Some of them had lived similar stories. This was a community of survivors, of people who'd escaped bondage and rebuilt their lives from nothing. Days turned into weeks. Sarah fell into a routine. She worked at the boarding house during the day. In the evenings, Miss Opal allowed the boarders to use her small library. Sarah taught herself to read. She'd start with a children's primer someone had donated, struggled through simple words. Cat had sat. But she was determined. Every night she read until her eyes hurt. Within a month she could read basic sentences. Within 2 months she was reading newspapers, slowly, carefully, sounding out unfamiliar words. But reading, the world opened up to her in ways she'd never imagined. She read about laws and politics, about places far away, about ideas and philosophies. She read about Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth. She read their words and felt less alone. 3 months after arriving in Chattanooga, Sarah sat on the porch of the boarding house, reading a newspaper. There was an article about peonage, about colored workers being held in debt bondage throughout the South, about how little had actually changed since the war, about how freedom was still just a word for so many people. Sarah read it 3 times. Then she set the paper down and made a decision. She would tell her story. She would write it down, everything that happened at Carver Plantation, everything she'd seen and endured. She would send it to newspapers, to politicians, to anyone who would listen. She would make sure people knew. She would make sure Thomas and the others weren't forgotten. That evening she bought paper and a pencil with money she'd saved from